briefing on China's economic data. We're glad to be joined by Mr. Linghui, spokesperson of the National Bureau of Statistics and Director General of the Department of Comprehensive Statistics of the NBS. He will brief us on China's economic performance in the first half of 2020 and take your questions. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Fu. Friends from the media, good morning. I'll first brief you China's major indicators in the first half of this year and answer your questions. Taking strong measures adopted to counter the impacts of unexpected factors and national economy registered a stable recovery. This year faced increasingly complicated international environment as well as multiple local outbreaks of COVID-19. The economy in the second quarter was under noticeable downward pressure, and the economic development was unusual with significantly increased adverse impacts. Faced with extreme complexities, under the strong leadership of Central Committee of the Communist Party of China with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, we have deeply implemented the decisions and arrangements made by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, responded to COVID-19, and pursued economic and social development in a coordinated manner. We step up macro policy adjustments and fully implement a package of stability policies and measures. The resurgence of the pandemic was contained, national economy registered a stable recovery, production and demand saw improving margins, market prices were generally stable, people's livelihoods was sufficiently protected, and momentum for high-quality development was sustained, and the overall social stability was maintained. First, national economy realized positive growth in the second quarter despite downward pressure. Major economic indicators April slumped, faced with new growing downward pressure. We implemented the policy measures of the Central Economic Work Conference and the Government Work Report and rolled out a package of policies to ensure economic stability. A national teleconference on maintaining economic stability was hosted, and policies have soon taken effect. The decline of major economic indicators narrowed in May, and the economy in June registered a stable recovery. The economy in the second quarter achieved positive growth. According to preliminary estimates, the GDP in the first half was over 56,000 billion yuan, up by 2.5% year-on-year at constant prices. By industry, the value added of the primary industry over 2,900 billion yuan, up by 5% year-on-year. The secondary industry over 22,000 billion yuan, up by 3.2%, and the tertiary industry over 30,000 billion yuan, up by 1.8%. Specifically, the GDP for Q2 was over 29,000 billion yuan, up by 0.4% year-on-year. And by industry, in Q2, the value added of the primary industry was over 1,800 billion yuan, up by 4.4% year-on-year, and the secondary industry over 12,000 billion yuan, up by 0.9%, and the tertiary industry over 15,000 billion yuan, down by 0.4%. Second, summer grain witnessed another harvest, and animal husbandry grew steadily. In H1, the value added of agriculture went up by 4.5% year-on-year, and the overall output of summer grain was over 147 million tons, a 1.4 million tons higher than that of last year, an increase of 1%. The structure of crop farming continued to optimize. In the first half, the output of pork, beef, mutton, and poultry was over 45 million tons, up by 5.3% year-on-year. The output of pork, beef, mutton was up by 8.2, 3.8, 0.7% respectively, and the poultry down by 0.8%. That of milk went up by 8.4% and eggs up by 3.5%. In Q2, the output of pork, beef, mutton, and poultry went up by 1.6% year-on-year. And by the end of second quarter, the number of pigs registered in stock was over 430 million, down by 1.9% year-on-year, among which over 42 million were breeding sows, and over 365 million pigs were slaughtered, up by 8.4%. Third, industrial production was steadily recovered, and high-tech manufacturing enjoyed fast development. In H1, the total value added of the industrial enterprises above the designated size grew by 3.4% year-on-year. By sector, the value added of mining increased by 9.5%, manufacturing increased by 2.8%, the production of supply of electricity, heat, gas, and water increased by 3.9%. The value added of high-tech manufacturing went up by 9.6%. And by ownership, the value added of the state-holding enterprises grew by 2.7%, shareholding enterprises up 4.8%, enterprises founded by foreign and Macau, Hong Kong, Taiwan investors down by 2.1%, and private enterprises up by 4%. By product, the production of new energy, automobiles, solar cells, and mobile communication base stations grew by over 100%, 31%, and 19% year-on-year respectively. In Q2, the total value added of the industrial prices above the designated size went up by 0.7% year-on-year. In April, down by 2.9%. In May, the negative growth shifted to positive growth, up by 0.7%. In June, up by 3.9%. In June, the PMI stood at about 50%, and 0.6 percentage point higher than that of the previous month. The production operation expectation index was above 55% and 1.3 percentage points higher. In the first 5 months, the total profits made by industrial enterprises above the designated size was over 3,400 billion yuan, up by 1% year-on-year. Fourth, service sector recovered gradually, and modern services industries witnessed good momentum and growth. In H1, the value added of services went up by 1.8%. That of information transmission, software and information technology services, and that of financial intermediation grew by 9.2% and 5.5% respectively. The decline in the index of services production in April was narrowed to 5.1% in May, and that in June shifted from decline to an increase of 1.3%. In the first 5 months, business revenue of services enterprises above the designated size went up by 4.6%. And in June, the business activity index for services was 54.3%, 7.2 percentage points higher than that of the previous month. The business activity index for retail sales, railway transportation, road, air transportation, postal services, monetary and financial services, and capital market services stayed within the expansion range of 55% and above. In terms of market expectation, the business activity expectation index for services was above 60%. Fifth, market sales improved and retail sales of goods and for basic living grew fast. In H1, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached over 21,000 billion yuan, down by 0.7% year-on-year. And the retail sales in urban area reached over 18,000 billion yuan, down by 0.8%, and the retail sales in rural areas reached over 2,700 billion yuan, down by 0.3%. And the retail sales of goods was over 19,000 billion yuan, up by 0.1%, and the income of catering was over 2,000 billion yuan, down by 7.7%. The retail sales of grain, oil, food, and that of beverage by enterprises above the designated size went up by 9.9% and 8.2% respectively. The online retail sales totaled over 6,300 billion yuan, up by 3.1%, and the online retail sales of goods were over 5,000 billion yuan, up by 5.6%, accounting for 25.9% of the total retail sales of consumer goods. In Q1, the total retail sales of consumer goods down by 4.6%, and in April, that was down by 11.1%. The decline in May narrowed to 6.7%. And in June, this number shifted from decline to an increase of 3.1%. or up by 0.53 percentage point month-to-month. Sixth, investment in fixed assets continued to grow, and investment in high-tech industries and social sectors grew fast. In H1, the investment in fixed assets reached over 27,000 billion yuan, up by 6.1%. The investment in infrastructure was up by 7.1%, manufacturing up 10.4%, real estate development down by 5.4%, and the floor space of commercial buildings sold reached over 680 million square meters, down by 22.2%. The total sales of commercial buildings were over 6,600 billion yuan, down by 28.9%. By industry, the investment in primary industry up 4%, secondary industry up 10.9%, tertiary industry up 4%, the private investment up 3.5%. The investment in high-tech industries grew by 20.2%, and the investment in high-tech manufacturing and high-tech services increased by 23.8% and 12.6% respectively. The investment in manufacturing of electronic communication equipment and in manufacturing of medical equipment, measuring instruments and meters grew by over 28% respectively. In terms of high-tech services, the investment in services for information of scientific and technological achievements and in R&D and design services up by 13.6% and 12.4% respectively. In second quarter, the investment in fixed assets witnessed an increase of 4.2% year-on-year, and the growth rate was 1.8% in April, 4.6% in May, and rebounded further to 5.6% in June. Seventh, imports and exports of goods grew fast and trade structure continued to optimize. In H1, the total value of trading goods was over 19,000 billion yuan, an increase of 9.4% year-on-year. The total value of export was over 11,000 billion yuan, up by 13.2%. The total value of import was over 8,600 billion yuan, up by 4.8%, and the trade balance was over 2,400 billion yuan surplus. The import and export of general goods increased by 13.1%, 2.1 percentage points higher than that of the same period last year. The trade by private enterprises increased by 13.6%, accounting for 49.6% of the total value of import and export. And the trade of mechanical and electronic products increased by 4.2%. And in June, the total value of import and export witnessed an increase of 14.3% year-on-year, and the total value of export up by 22%, and the total value of import up by 4.8%. Eighth, consumer price saw moderate growth, and growth of producer prices of industrial products continued to decline. CPI went up by 1.7% year-on-year in H1, and the prices for food, tobacco, and alcohol were up by 0.4%, clothing up 0.5%, housing 1.2% up, articles and services for daily use up 1%, transportation communication up 6.3%, education, culture, recreation up 2.3%, medical services and healthcare up 0.7%, and other articles and services up 1.2%. Prices for pork down by 33.2%, grain up by 2.4%, fresh fruit up by 12%, and fresh vegetables up by 8%. Core CPI, excluding the prices of food and energy, up by 1%. In Q2, the consumer price index went up by 2.3%. The consumer price index increased by 2.1% year-on-year both in April and May, and rose by 2.5%, and maintained the same level of growth month-on-month in June. In H1, PPI up by 7.7%, with a year-on-year growth of 6.8% in Q2. PPI grew by 8% in April and 6.4% in May, and up by 6.1%, and maintained the same level of growth month on month in June. The purchasing prices for industrial producers up by 10.4% year on year in H1 and up by 9.5% in Q2. It grew by 10.8% and 9.1% in April and May, respectively, and up by 8.5% and 0.2% month on month in June. 9th, employment improved and surveyed unemployment rate in rural areas went down. In H1, the newly increased employed people in rural areas totaled over 6 million. The surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas averaged 5.7% in H1 and 5.8% in Q2. In April, the surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas was 6.1%. And in June, the surveyed unemployment rate of population with local household registration was 5.3%, and that of population with non-local household registration was 5.8%. The surveyed unemployment rates of the population aged from 16 to 24 and from 25 to 59 were 19.3% and 4.5%. The urban surveyed unemployment rate in 31 major cities was 5.8%, 1.1 percentage points lower than May. The employees of enterprises worked 47.7 hours per week on average. And by end of Q2, the number of rural migrant workers totaled over 181 million. 10th, residents' income increased stably and rural-urban per capita income ratio narrowed. In H1, the nationwide per capita disposable income residents was over 18,000 yuan, a nominal increase of 4.7%, and the real growth was 3%, deducting price factors. The per capita disposable income of urban households was over 25,000 yuan, a nominal increase of 3.6%, and a real growth of 1.9% year on year. The per capita disposable income of rural households was over 9,700 yuan, a nominal increase of 5.8%, and a real growth of 4.2%. The nationwide per capita salary income, net business income, net property income, and net income from transfers witnessed a nominal growth of 4.7%, 3.2%, 5.2%, and 5.6% respectively. The per capita income of urban households was 2.55 times that of rural households. It was at 0.06 less than the same period last year. The median of the nationwide per capita disposable income was over 15,000 yuan, a nominal increase of 4.5% year on year. With these measures taken, the national economy has overcome the adverse impact of unexpected factors, demonstrating momentum of stable recovery, and Q2 witnessed a positive growth. This is no easy achievement. At the same time, we should be aware that the foundation of stable economic recovery is yet to be consolidated due to external and internal factors. Shrinking demand intertwines with disrupted supply, structural problems combines with cyclical problems, and market entities still face difficulties. We will continue to follow the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics, faithfully and comprehensively implement the new development philosophy, and coordinate COVID response and economic and social development to fully implement the package of measures to stabilize the economy and constantly consolidate the foundation for a stable economic recovery to keep the major economic indicators within the appropriate range. Now we move on to questions. Please identify yourself before raising questions. First, please. Phoenix TV. In Q2, China's economy was severely hit by COVID. How do you comment on China's economic performance in Q2? Will China continue to sustain the economic recovery?
Thank you for your question. In Q2, due to factors both at home and abroad, the impact of the downward pressure increased. However, thanks to the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, various departments have advanced both COVID response and economic development. We have adopted a package of policies and effectively curbed the rebound of COVID. Number one, in Q2, we achieved positive economic growth. Despite the COVID impact in April, we adopted a series of measures to stabilize growth and ensured positive growth for Q2. It increased by 0.4%. Industry and investment continued to grow. In Q2, industrial growth stood at 0.7%. Fixed asset investment increased by 4.2%. Number two, since May, economic growth continued to pick up. Economic performance dropped in April, but with the easing of the COVID situation in May, the downward trend was curbed, and the economic indicators continue to stabilize. In terms of production, the industrial output increased by 3.9% in June, and the service production index increased by 1.3%. In terms of demand, in June, the total retail sales increased 3.1%. The export was up 22%. In terms of different regions, among the 31 provinces across the country, 21 saw an increase of industrial output, accounting for 67%, and 30 provinces saw an increase of total retail sales, accounting for 96%. Number three, employment and price were basically stable. In Q2, the unemployment rate was 5.8%. In terms of month performance, in April, the unemployment rate was 6.1%, and the unemployment continued to drop in both May and June. In June, the population between 25 and 59 years old was 4.5%, and the unemployment rate of non-local residents with rural household registration was 5.3%. CPI saw moderate growth. In Q2, CPI was up 2.3%. And price increase in China was significantly lower than the 8% in Europe and the US. Number four, foreign trade was sound and foreign exchange reserve was stable. In Q2, foreign trade increased by 8.1%. And foreign trade increased by 0.1% and 9.6% respectively in April and May, and the growth accelerated to 14.3% in June. Number five, the industry continued to upgrade. Emerging industries saw rapid growth. In Q2, high-tech manufacturing industry grew by 5.7%, and the share of manufacturing industry continued to grow, and the share stood at 28% in Q2. Modern service industry saw rapid growth. In Q2, information transmission and ICT service industry, as well as the financial industry, saw a growth of 7.6% and 5.9% respectively. Generally speaking, in Q2, we overcame various challenges and achieved steady growth. Going forward, despite the negative impacts both at home and abroad. The fundamentals for sound growth in China
and multiple outbreaks in China's COVID situation. There have been some fluctuations in China's economy. In the first 2 months, the economic recovery was beyond expectation, and in March and April, affected by international environment and domestic COVID situation and other unexpected factors, major economic indicators saw a significant decline. But since May, we have taken a series of measures to boost the economy, and the COVID situation eases, the economic operation rebounded, and positive changes have been on the rise. First, the economy has overcome difficulties to maintain growth. As I said, the international environment has become more complex and challenging, and the world economic growth has slowed down. The massive COVID situation has posed severe challenges to China's economic stability, especially since April, the economic downward pressure was mounting. Following the decisions and plans of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, we have taken a package of economic policies and measures and macro policy adjustment to maintain the stability of the economy and achieved positive growth in Q2. In H1, the GDP grew by 2.5%, and in Q2 grew by 0.4%. This is no easy achievement considering the decline of major economic indicators in April and May. This shows China's resilience in economy. Second, the price has maintained overall stability. Affected by geopolitical conflict and the increase of liquidity of major economies in the world, the commodity price, especially energy and food, has maintained on a high level. Against this background, China has ensured the supply and production of food and energy and the stability of price. In H1, the CPI increased by 1.7%, lower than the 3% target annually. And the core CPI, excluding the price of food and energy, was only up by 1%. And the CPI of China was much lower than 8% in Europe and America, which is conducive to China's stable economic recovery and the improvement of livelihood. Third, about employment. Indeed, the pressure of employment has been mounting, and people have more difficulties to gain more income. But we have seen positive changes. In H1, the newly employed people in rural areas over 6 million, and in May, the surveyed unemployment rate in rural areas saw a decline for consecutive 2 months. And in June, the surveyed unemployment rate in rural areas, in urban areas, was 5.5%, a 0.4 percentage point down compared with the previous month. And the residents' income continued to grow steadily. The per capita disposable income nationwide increased by 3%, despite a slightly lower than Q1, but is still faster than GDP growth. Fourth, the resilience of foreign trade. The PMI has stayed above the 50% line, and in H1, the trading goods increased by 9.4% year-on-year. Export increased by 13.2%. In June, the trading goods increased by 14.3% year-on-year, and a 4.7 percentage points higher than May. Fifth, economic transformation upgrade continued its momentum. Despite downward economic pressure, China's economic innovation has been leading the growth, and the momentum and new growth drivers continue to emerge. The value added of high-tech manufacturing by enterprises above the designated size increased by 9.6% year-on-year, and the investment in high-tech industries increased by increased by over 20%. In H1, the value added of manufacturing accounted by 28.8% of total GDP. And the urban-rural residents per capita income ratio was 2.55, a 0.06 percentage point than that of last year. In H1, the production of solar cells and new NEVs stood at 31.8% and over 100%. In general, in Q1, China's economy has shown rebounding momentum. But considering the challenging external environment, there are still some challenges facing in domestic economic recovery. We'll continue to follow the decisions and plans of the CPC, Central Committee, and State Council to fully implement the package policies that stabilizes economic growth to push forward the economic recovery. Next question, please. With Reuters. The GDP growth in H1 was 2.5%. It's much below the 5.5% target. How do you predict the momentum in H2? Will there be more measures to boost economic recovery, in particular with regard to consumption and private investment?
Thank you for your question. In the first half of the year, due to complicated situation abroad and COVID situation at home, economic growth faced some difficulties. Thanks to the joint efforts, we did a successful job in achieving positive growth. Across the world, the risk of stagflation is increasing, and there are some uncertain factors for economic growth. For the first half, going forward, as we adopt more measures to stabilize growth, our economic performance is expected to improve. Number one, as a major country, our economy has big resilience. Despite the shock of COVID, the size of our economy is still big. We have a strong foundation of economic growth and a very big market. In the first half of the year, our GDP reached 56 trillion yuan, and the industrial output reached 20 trillion yuan. The added value of service sector was exceeded 30 trillion yuan. Fixed asset investment exceeded 27 trillion yuan, and total retail sales still exceeded 21 trillion yuan. This has increased our confidence to meet various challenges. Number two, we have big potential for the recovery of demand. In terms of investment, we have adopted more measures to stabilize investment. We have issued special bonds and advanced major products. In the first half of the year, infrastructure investment increased 7.1% year-on-year, and the total investment for new projects increased by 22.9%. In terms of consumption, with the improvement of the COVID situation, the offline consumption continued to recover. In terms of foreign trade, our foreign trade has big potential. At the moment, logistics at the ports continue to be ensured, and the foreign trade at the Yangtze River Delta continued to recover, and this has given us a very good foundation to stabilize foreign trade. In May, foreign trade increased 9.5% or 9.4 percentage points higher than April, and in June, foreign trade increased 14.3% or 4.8 percentage points higher than May. Number three, production recovery has been well supported. In terms of industry, in May, the industrial growth saw positive growth. It was up 0.7%. With the recovery of businesses, the impediments for industrial and supply chains have been removed. In particular, in Q2, those COVID-hit areas saw a rapid recovery of production. In June, PMI returned to above 50%, and the Production and Operation Activity Expectation Index reached 55%. This shows that the manufacturing business confidence continued to grow. In terms of the service sector, in June, the service output increased 1.3%. In particular, with the accelerated recovery of production and life, service demand will continue to grow. Business confidence will recover. In June, PMI for service sector rose to 54%, and the business expectation index reached 61%. In terms of transport, the cargo transport continued to be ensured, which can support the further recovery of production. The logistic confidence index was 52%, or 2.8 percentage points higher than the previous month. Number 4, innovation-driven development has been ensured. In recent years, we promoted innovation-driven development, vigorously promoted industrial transformation and upgrading. In this way, the traditional industries have been expanded to have been promoted with the development of the digital industry and internet industry. Emerging industries have continued to grow. In Q2, high-tech manufacturing industry saw a growth of 5.7%. And the ICT industry saw a growth of 7.6%. Number 5, we've adopted effective macroeconomic policies. In Q2, facing downward economic pressure, the CPC, Central Committee and State Council, adopted 33 policy measures to stabilize growth. In June, the State Council made further arrangements to implement relevant policies. We have seen that infrastructure investment increased significantly, consumer goods consumption recovered, and the business confidence continued to improve. Going forward, as we adopt more measures such as tax refund, issuance of special bonds, we will further promote economic growth. Generally speaking, as the COVID situation further eases and our policy, the impact of our policy will be seen further, and we will further leverage our strength of market size, space and development resilience. In this way, we will continue to promote economic growth. Meanwhile, with the destabilizing and uncertain factors abroad, with the triple pressures at home, we need to make a lot of efforts to ensure economic growth. Thank you. Next question, please. Thank you. With China National Radio, we've noted that some places have been hit hard by COVID. What is the recovery situation, and how do you comment on the performance of different regions? Thank you.
Thank you. In H1, COVID has posed severe challenge to some regions in China. But the impacts are only short-term and temporary, will not change the momentum of economic growth and recovery. In Q2, we see as we coordinate COVID response and the package of economic policies have been implemented, and the regions affected by COVID have rebounded in economic recovery and see positive changes. In Q2, most regions have maintained stability of economy. Of the 31 provinces, cities, and autonomous regions, about 83% of them maintained growth, and the surveyed unemployment rate of 29 lower than the average level.
从价格来看，大部分地区物价涨势温和。二季度30个省区市居民消费价格同比涨幅低于3%。二是中西部地区经济增势较好。二季度中西部地区生产总值同比分别增长2.3%和2%，增速均快于全国。从上半年的情况来看呢，中西部地区增长快于东部。上半年中西部地区规模以上工业增加值同比均增长7.3%，快于东部地区5.1个百分点。中西部地区固定资产投资分别增长10.7%和8%，分别快于东部地区6.2和3.5个百分点。三是部分地区受疫情冲击较大。那么疫情冲击下呢，生产生活正常秩序受到了一定影响，部分地区的经济出现下滑，失业率水平稳升高。二季度上海、吉林地区生产总值同比下降了13.7%和4.5%。二季度上海和吉林的城镇调查失业率为12.5%和7.6%，都明显高于全国水平。四是受疫情冲击影响较大的地区呢是加快恢复。那么尽管二季度部分地区的经济受疫情冲击较大，但是从月度来看，随着疫情防控总体向好，企业复工复产加快，6月份主要的经济指标是明显改善。6月份上海、吉林规模以上工业增加值同比增长了13.9%和6.3%，和上个月呢是分别下降了30.9%和4.9%。那么从消费来看呢，吉林县额以上单位消费品零售总额6月份是增长5.5%，那么上个月呢是下降1.5%。那么从就业来看，上海和吉林的这个城镇调查失业率分别比上个月是下降了9.7%和0.8个百分点，说明呢这些地区受疫情冲击大地区的经济恢复呢是在
This proves their recovery momentum.
总的来看，我国多数地区经济总体稳定。
In general, most regions in China ensure stability in economy, and Midwest recover faster than Eastern
部分地区
region.
受疫情影响，遇到暂时的困难，但在
Some regions
各项稳定
are
经济
facing
政
the
策措施的
temporary
作用下
impact of
经济
COVID,
运行是加快恢复。
but as
当然也
they
要看到，
coordinate
我
the
国经
COVID
济发展不
response,
平
they
衡的问
have
题呢仍比较
been
突
on
出，
the
地区之间
recovery
发展
track.
差距还比较大。 下
Still,
阶
the
段要
gap,
继续深入实施区
the
域重
development
大
gap
战
among
略
regions is
和
still
区域
there,
协调
and
发
will
展战
continue
略，
to coordinate
缩
the
小地区
development
差距，
strategies among
促
different
进经
regions,
济
narrow
协
the
调
development
可
gap
持续发
among
展。
regions,
谢谢。
and push for sustained economic
请继续
growth.
提问。
Next question, please.
这边吧，最后一排那边，外国记者。
My question is about industrial output. Looking at the headline number, it rose 3.9%. But if you look at the breakdown, according to my calculations, electricity output only rose 0.1%. Rolled steel output fell 3.7%. Cement output fell almost 17%. Plate glass only rose 0.2%. Semiconductors fell. Cars fell. Smartphone production fell. What rose to drive total industrial output up 3.9% when so many industrial goods output fell over the same period? Thank you.
Bloomberg， 彭博，是彭博对吧 ？From Bloomberg。OK， 请翻译一下。
我们看，是来自彭博社的记者。我们看到了工业生产，今天报告当中所提到的是实现了3.9%的增长，但是根据不同的产品看，根据我个人的估算，其实很多产品的指标都是出现了下滑。我想知道这个3.9%的指标到底是怎么实现和达成的？谢谢。
工业生产来看呢，我们知道呢，
In terms of industrial
今年以
output,
来呢，受到这个疫情冲击，我们
this
说
year
这个
due
4月
to
份
COVID,
工业生产呢是出现有所下降。
industrial
那么
output
5月
saw
份
a
呢应该
decrease
是
in
由降转
April,
升，那么6月份
and
呢
it
增速是明显
shifted
加
to
快。
positive territory
从
in May,
工业产品
and
产量
the
和
growth
这个
further
增加值的情况来看，
accelerated
我们
in
看到
June.
6月份
In terms of industrial
汽
output,
车
we
行
can
业的这
see
个生
that
产呢是明显
the
回升。
car industry
因为前
saw a
期
strong
呢，
rebound
受疫情冲击
in
影响的
June
长三角地区呢，汽车行业的产业链呢
because
受
due
到
to
了一定影响。
COVID
但是从这个
situation,
近期来看呢，
car
随着
output
上海等
and
地区的这
production
个经济
in the
呢在
Yangtze
逐步恢
River
复，
Delta
汽车行业的这个
dropped.
生产呢是
But with
增长
the
的增
easing
速，
of
无论
COVID
是从产量
situation
还是从这个
in Shanghai and
还是从
other
这个增加
Yangtze
值的
River
情况来看
Delta
呢，都是比上月
cities,
是明显加快。
car
那么对于
output
整个
increased significantly,
整个这个6月份
and the
工
production
业
of
生产的回升呢
cars
起到了重要的作
played a
用。
very important
那么
role
您
in
刚才
supporting
谈到
industrial
这个
output.
部分的这
in
个
June
一些产品部分
We
产品
talk about
这
some
个
industrial
有下滑的
products
情况，
which
但是呢，
saw
我们知道呢
decrease.
整个的工业生产呢
But we are
它有
aware that
我们统计大概有500多种产品啊，我们
There are
统
over
计当中呢
500 types of
500多
industrial
种产品，但
products,
多数呢整体上还是这个整体的面儿还是保持增长的。
and
所
most
以总
of
的来
them
看呢，
saw an increase.
这个6月份工业生产的
So
回升呢
generally， speaking,
从结构
the
上来看，主
recovery
要
of
是这个
industrial
装备制
output
造业的
in
回升比
June
较明显，
is
特别是汽车
basically
行业的这个
supported
回
by
升，对整
equipment
个工业增长的
manufacturing,
带动是
particularly
比较突
car
出的。那么其
manufacturing.
他的这些行业呢，相关的随着
For other
经济的
types of
恢复，那
industries,
么对整
with
个的工业的
the
增长
overall
也起到了一
economic
定的支撑作
recovery,
用。
they
谢
will
谢。
continue to
好，
support
请继续
the
提问。
recovery of industrial output. Next question, please.
好，先这边吧。第一排。
谢谢。封面新闻记者提问。
Thank you.
今
With
年
the
16到
cover,
24岁的青年人调查失业率创下了新高。
the
能否详
employment
细介绍一
rate
下当前青年人
of
就业的有关情
16
况？
to
发
24
言人对
years
下一
old
阶段
population
就
hit a
业
record
形势和
high.
预判。今
What
年
is
全
your
年能否
comment
完成
on the
1100万人
unemployment
以上的就业目
situation,
标？谢谢。
and can we deliver on the
谢
target
谢您的提问。
of creating
大家呢
jobs?
确实很关心
Thank you
就
for
业
your
问题。
question.
我们说呢，就业是民生之本。
We attach
那么
great
今年以来呢，
importance
应该
to
说呢，
employment,
各方面的这个
which
国际环
is
境
the
比较复杂
foundation of
国内
economic
的疫情冲
growth.
击呢，确实也都
Due to the
对这个
complicated
就业的这
economic
个造成了一定
situation
的影响。
abroad and
但是
COVID
总的来看呢，应
situation
该
at
说呢，
home,
在各方面的共同努力下，随着经济
we
的逐步
have
恢复，
seen some
随
impact
着
on employment,
各项的
but with the joint
就业政
efforts,
策逐步
particularly
落
with the
实，那
adoption
么
of economic measures,
城镇调查失业率
the
升高的
unemployment rate
趋势呢，实际上是得到了扭转。
no
我们看到呢
longer
受这
increase.
个多方面因素的影响呢，4月份呢，这个城镇
In
调查失业率呢是
April,
升到了
the unemployment
6.1%。
rate was
那么
6.1%.
从5月份开始，
Starting
已经这个
from
城镇调查失
May,
业也是连续2个月开始下降。
the
那么5月
unemployment
份的
rate
这个城镇调查失业
continued
率
to drop
为
for 2
5.9%，
months, and the
上月
unemployment
下降
rate
1.2
was
个百分点。那么6月份呢，
5.9% or
进一步降
0.2
至了
percentage point
5.5%。
higher, lower than the
那么从
previous
整个
month,
二季度
and
的
the
情况来
unemployment
看，
rate
就
was
业
5.5%
形势呢
in
主要有以
June.
下几个特点。
And there are
第一呢
the
是就
following
业主体人
features
群的
for
就业
employment.
总体稳定。
Number one,
25到
the
59岁成年人的
employment
失业率
rate
4月份虽有所升高，
was
但是升
basically
幅呢
stable
是明
for
显低于
the
整
age
体
group
失业
between
率的
25 and
升幅的水
59
平。
years old.
6月份的25到
In
59岁成年人
June,
的失业率
for
为
this age
4.5%，
group,
比
the
上个月是
unemployment
回
rate
落了
was
0.6个百分点，
4.5%,
那么接
or
近2021年的平
0.6
均水
percentage
平。
points lower
第二
than the
呢是农
previous
民工
month.
群体的就业形势呢
Number
好
two,
转。
the
那
immigrant,
么
the
农民工
migrant
群体呢
workers
多是
saw a
从事
sound
劳动密集
situation
制
of
造业和服务业行业。
employment,
那么
and
以个体
the
户和灵
migrant
活就业的
workers mainly
居多
work。in the
那么
heavy
就业稳定性呢相对较
industry,
差。那么
and
受疫情冲
the
击影响呢
stability of the
，4月
employment
份外来农业
is
户籍人口的失业率呢
not
是升至了
their
6.6%。
employment situation was not
那
very
么随着疫
stable.
情逐步得到了控制，
But
助企稳
as we
岗措施发
control
力，
COVID
农民
situation
工群
and
体的这个
adopt
就业呢
pro-job
出现了改
measures,
善。那么5
their
月份
employment
外来
situation
农业户籍
continued
人
to
口的失业
improve.
率降至6.2%， 6月份降至5.3%。
The
低于
unemployment
整体失业率的
rate
水平。
was 6.2%
第三
and
呢是青年人的就
5.3%
业
for
压力
this
呢
group
仍然
in
较大。
both May and
那么
June.
青年群体
And
呢
three,
初次
the
进入劳
young
动力市
people
场，普
are
遍面临
facing
摩擦性失业
difficulties
的困境。
in finding
同 时呢，受疫情的影响呢，企业吸纳就业的能力有所下降，年轻人求职的渠道呢，在疫情条件下呢也受到了阻碍。加之今年的高校毕业生总量呢又创历史新高，加剧了青年人的就业压力。那么6月份16到24岁的城镇
In June, the unemployment rate for the people between 16 and 24 years old, the unemployment rate was 19.3%. And we're facing big pressure of unemployment of the young people. We need to adopt more effective measures and implement relevant measures and help them find jobs. Thank you. Next question, please.
那边吧，那边，往那边走，对，靠墙有一位记者。
您好，《金融时报》记者。想问一下，您
With
刚才
Financial
说这个
Times,
二季
just
度咱
now
们
you
这
said
个
that in
固定资产投
Q2,
资
fixed
持续出
asset
现好转。与此
investments
同时呢，我们也注意到这
continue
个
to improve.
6月份
Meanwhile, we are
水泥
aware
产量
that
依然呈现
cement
这个
output
12.9%的下降，然后
saw
呢，
a
沥青
drop
的开
of
工率呢也呈现相对历史
12%.
低位。请问怎么理解这样一种反差？然
How
后
do you
对
see
于
the
未来
contrast?
基建投资应该有怎样的预计？
What is your prediction for further infrastructure investment?
提问。
Thank you
应该
for
说
your
呢，
question.
今年以来呢，大家对投资以及相关产品、相关投资产品的这种关注是比较
Indeed,
高的。
there have been growing
应该说呢，
amount of interest
近年以
in
来呢，我国
infrastructure
的投
investment.
资从3大领域来看，一个是制造业基
The
础设施
investment in
和这个
manufacturing,
房地产。
infrastructure, and real
目
estate
前来看
have
呢，
been the
整
most
体上来看，制造业的投资增
the
长
area of
增速最快
most
的。
interest to the
上半
wider
年呢，增
public.
速超过10%。
The investment in
那么我们知道呢，
manufacturing
其中的制造
grew
业
the
当中，
fastest in
高
H1,
技术制造业、
and
高
high-tech
技术产
industry,
业、
high-tech
高技术制造业
manufacturing
的增长呢是超过20%的增
grew
速。
by over
那么
20%.
从结构上来看呢，我们
structure-wise
这个中国的经济呢，这个产业发展在逐步升级。那么对于
China's upgrading its
产业这个
industry,
升级相关的这个产品的带动呢是比较明显。
there is
相反，
a
一些传
growing
统行业
momentum
传统
that
行业的
mobilizing more
这种
resources
投资的增
toward
长呢是逐步的这
new
个
industries
趋缓。
compared
那么
to
相应的
traditional
对相
industries.
关产品的这种带动呢，跟过去相比呢出现了不同的变化。但总的来看呢，
In general,
随着未来的这个中国产业升级的发展，高质量的
as
持续推
China
进，创新
continues
的这
to
种持
further
续
its
的发展。
upgrade
那
in
么
industry,
相关的这个对于装备制造业、高技
the
术相关的
equipment
这种产品的带动
manufacturing,
是在增
high-tech
强。
manufacturing
所
will
以
continue to receive more
总的来看
attention
呢，
and
这个
resources.
中国经济呢，这个尽管我们说今年以来呢受到了这个疫情的冲击啊，但是呢，我们说这个产业发展升级、高质量发
Despite
展
the
的态
impact
势
of
没有改
COVID,
变。
the momentum of industrial upgrade
就业
remains
物
unchanged
价的
in
形势
China,
呢是总体稳定啊。
and
从这些
the
情况来
price
看呢，
level
我
and
们说
employment remains
未
stable.
来中国经济呢这个迈向高质量发展的这种趋势不会
So
改
China
变
will。continue to
谢谢。
further down its path to industrial
好，请继续
upgrade.
提问。
Next question.
好，这边吧，第3排这位记者。
你好，日本朝日新闻提问。
Asahi Shimbun.
如果没有新冠疫情带来的那个城市封控等影响，中国经济的潜在
If
增
we
长
can rule out
大
the
概
impact
是
of
多少？
citywide COVID
另外
measures,
您
what is the
如何
potential
看
growth
待
of China's
下半
economy?
年的经济恢复对实现
And how do you comment
5.5%
on
的
the
GDP
H2
增长目
economic
标的
recovery of
可能性？
China
谢谢。
contribute
谢谢
to
您
the
的提问。
annual growth target of
关于中国这个潜
5.5%?
能增长率的
Is it still possible?
这个测算呢，应该是
Thank you for your question.
很多
In
机构
terms
和
of
学
the
者都进行过测算，
potential
那么
growth
测算结
rate,
果呢还有一定的差
some
异。
experts
但是
have
总的
conducted
来看呢，多数结
their
论呢
analysis.
这个认为呢，现阶段中
Most
国
of
经济的
them
潜在增长率
believe
大概
that
在
their
5%到6%之
China's
间。
potential
那么
GDP
未来
growth
随着中国
is
经济体
between
量的增
5
大，
to 6%.
劳动
As
力
our
资源
economic size
环境的约
continue
束
to
的增
grow,
强，那么潜在
and
增长率呢
with
水
bigger
平呢也会逐步降低。
restrictions in
但是
terms
从
of
全球范围来
environment,
看
the
呢，
potential growth
5%
rate
到6%这样的一
will
个潜在
decrease.
增长率水平呢
But
仍然
generally
处于一个
speaking, across
中
the
高水
world,
平。
a
特别是
potential growth
中
rate
国
of
这么大一
5 to
个经济体量的
6%
条件下，
is
能保持这样
quite
一个中高
high.
水平
In
是非常不
particular,
容易的。那么也表明呢，我国经济增长的潜力
given
还是
China's
比较大。
big economic size, such
那么
a medium
中国呢
high
仍然是世
level
界上最大的
of
发展
5
国家。
to
虽然我国
6%
这个人均
is not
GDP 已
easy
经
to
突破了
achieve.
1万美元，
our per capita GDP is now over $10,000, but it is still much lower than the $40,000 per capita GDP in advanced economies. This also presents big potential for further economic development. It needs to be pointed out that, given the complicated economic situation both at home and abroad, and the downward pressure on economic globalization, we are facing a crucial period of economic adjustment and transformation, and we are facing a difficult task to achieve steady economic growth. And we need to make painstaking efforts to achieve that. In the first half of the year, we resisted pressure, which is bigger than expected, and achieved positive growth. With rising uncertainties abroad and the triple pressure at home, we're facing challenges in achieving the GDP growth target. Meanwhile, the fundamentals have not changed, and our economic situation is very resilient, and we have strong macroeconomic tools. In the second half of the year, as we advance both COVID response and economic development, and as we adopt economic stabilizing measures, it is expected that our economy will continue to recover and be maintained at an appropriate range. Going forward, we will continue to promote economic development, advance both COVID response and economic development, and further implement the package policy for stabilized economy. In this way, we will further cement the foundation of economic development and promote its further growth. Thank you. Next question, please.
谢谢主持人。界面新闻记者提问。
Thank you.
我们看到6月份的 CPI 同比涨幅创下近2年的新高。随着猪周期上行的开启，请问发言人，下半年的通胀压力是否会进一步加大？政府在采取哪些措施会保持物价一直在合理区间？
second half of the year, what pressure will be adopted to keep price at the appropriate range? Thank you for your question. In fact, in recent months, inflation pressure abroad continued to rise, and at home, there are more worries about inflation as well. And as domestic markets continue to recover, and the import of inflation pressure from abroad, we are indeed facing risks of inflation, but still, our inflation in the first half of the year have been kept at a moderate level. In terms of Q2, CPI rose by 2.3%. It was up by 21% in both April and May, and up 2.5% in June. It carries the following features. Due to fresh fruit, egg, and the narrowing of pork price decline, we saw this kind of CPI performance. Number two, industrial output. The price of industrial products expanded. It was up by 4.1% in Q2 as a result of imported price pressure from abroad. In Q2, gas increased by about 30%. Number three, the service sector. The inflation for the service sector was only 0.8% or 0.5 percentage points lower than Q1. In June, CPI was up 2.5%, mainly because of the low base figure in the previous year, and the carryover effect was 1.2%, and the new factor was just 1.3%.
主要是由于猪肉价格降幅收窄的影响。
The narrowing
那么
of
能源价
pork
格上
price
涨
decline
17.4%，
contributed
扩大
to the
2.7%，
relative
主要还是由于汽柴油价格
moderate
上涨的影
CPI
响。
growth.
但是扣除食品和能源的核心 CPI 上涨1%，
The core
涨幅比上月
CPI was
扩大
up
0.1个百分点，表
1%,
明市场供求呢还是总体稳
or
定。
just
那么从国际范围来看呢，我国的价
0.1
格
percentage points
CPI 的涨
higher
幅
than
呢是明
Q1,
显
which shows
低于
that
欧美国家水
inflation
平。
in
主要是
China
由于我
was
国没有
stable,
采取
and
大
our
手漫
inflation
换的强刺
rate
激的措
was
施。
much lower
面对
than
国际输入性通胀，加大了
advanced
国内市
economies.
场保供
The
稳价的
reason
力
is
度，
that we did
保障
not
了 CPI 的总体稳
adopt
定。
excessive
加强
stimulus
这个粮
measures.
食生产，这个今年的夏粮呢也是实现了丰收，
We've also
夏粮生产呢
strengthened
比上年
grain
是增长了
output. The
1%。
summer grain
那么物
saw
价
a
的
bumper
形势的稳
harvest.
定，不仅有利于经济的
Price
平稳运
stability
行，
has
也有
ensured
利于民生的
stable
改善。
economic performance
关于大
and
家关心的
improvement of
猪肉价
people's
格
lives.
上行会不会影响 CPI 整体的涨幅？
People
总的来看是影
are
响有
watching
限。
closely whether
那么目前呢，生猪
the
产能呢总体是恢复到
price
了正
rise
常的
of
水平，
pork
价格不
will
具备大幅
contribute
上涨的
to
基础。
inflation.
前期
As a matter of
一些
fact,
压栏的大猪呢也
the
会陆
pork
续出
price
栏，
has
有利于
returned
增
to
加
the
猪的供给。
normal level,
加之
which
相关部
would
门
not
加强市
have
场
a big
调控，
impact
稳
on
定供求关
inflation.
系，
And
将
as
促
we
进价格的
adopt
平
more
稳运
measures,
行。那
the
么下阶段
price
呢，进入
will
汛期以后
continue
呢，
to see
部分地
stable
区的鲜活
performance.
商品的供应可能会受到一定的影响。
As we reach the
国际
flood
输入性的因
season,
素也可
some
能会持
places
续，但是
places
我国
may
商品和
face
服务供给能力
some
总体
pressures
是
in
充裕
terms
的，
of the supply of
市场
goods.
保供稳价的力度
But
在加大，
As we
价格呢
adopt
有
strong
望保持
measures to
温和上涨的
stabilize
态势。谢谢。
prices,
好，请继续
price
提问。
stability is expected to be ensured. Thank you. Next question, please.
谢谢主持人。澎湃新闻记者提问：您刚才提到了
5
月份规上工业增加值的增速由负转正，6月份呢继续加速。那么当前的国内多地也出现了疫情散发，对我国经济社会发展呢带来了新的不确定性。想请问您如何看待当前我国的复工复产的情况？对下半年及全年的工业经济的恢复情况做什么预判？谢谢。
那么上半年呢，应该说受国际、国内超预期因素的影响，
H1 unexpected
同比增速呢曾经这个4月份呢出现了下降，
resulted to
但
the
是呢，随着
decline
这
in
个
April
统筹疫情防控和经收站的成效
about
的
the
显现，那么稳定工
value
业
added
经
of
济
the
运行的
industrial
政策
enterprises
措施
above
发
the
力呢
designated
，5月份以
size.
来呢，工业
However,
生产呢
as
是
we took
连续回
measures,
升。
we see
从
continued
上半年来看
increase
呢，规模以上
in
工业
May
增加
and
值呢
June.
是同比增长了3.4%。
And
那么从
the
20
total
度来
value
看呢，
added of the
工业生产
industrial
是指数的下
enterprises
滑的势
grew
头
by
实现了由降
3.4%
转
year
升。
on year.
二季度呢，规模以上
And
工
in
业增加值呢
Q2,
是同比增长0.7%，
this number
其中4
went
月
up
份
by
是下降
0.7%.
2.9%，5月份是增长
In
0.7%，
April,
6
down
月
by
份是进一步加快到
2.9%,
了
and in May
3.9%。
shifted from
那么
negative
企
to
稳回升的态势呢
positive and
比
up
较
by
明显。
0.7%,
那么
and
主
in
要的表
June
现
was
呢，一个呢是采
3.9%.
矿业呢保持了较快的增长。那么
Mining
能源保供稳
maintained
价呢是持续
increase.
推进，相关
Energy
行业呢
and
持续
the
较快增
supply
长，
of
带
energy
动
and
了采矿
stability
业
of
的这个
supplies have
增
been
加值
achieved.
的增长。二季度呢，采矿业增加值同比增长了
The value
8.4%，
added of
其中煤
mining
炭开采和吸选业增加值
increased by
增长
8.4% in Q2
增长了10.8%，均明显快于全部规模以上工业的增长。
and faster than the
二是
average
高技术制造业
of
呢
the
增势不
total
减，
value added of the
尽管受
industrial
到疫情冲击
enterprises as a
等不
whole.
利的影响，那么工业升级发展的态势没有改变，
And the momentum
高
of
技术制造
upgrade
业增长
has
较快
remained.。
二季度规模以上
unchanged.
高技术制造业的增加值
And in
同比增长
Q2, the value added
7%，
of high-tech
快于规模以上
manufacturing
工业
increased by
表现出较强的韧
5.7%,
性。
faster than the total
三
value
是
added
工
of
业
the
出口的拉
industrial
动作用明显，
enterprises.
我国工业生产能力强，国际竞争力也
China
比较强，
has a very
工业出
competitive
口保
industry,
持较快的增长。
and
那
the
么二季度呢，
industrial
规模以上工业
export
出口交货值同比
increased
增长了
rapidly.
8.2%，其中6月份增长了15.1%，比上月是加快了4个百分
In
点。
June, the growth of
那么第四呢是中西部地区工业生产
Industrial
总体稳定。二季度东部
was
和
faster
东
than
北
the
部
same
分
period
地
of
区
last
受
year.
疫情冲击影响
And
较
in
大，
Q2,
但是
the
中西部地区
northeastern
工业生产
region
总体稳定，
was heavily
支
hit,
撑了工业
but
的
the
生
mid
产。
and west
二季度
part of
中
China
部、西部
supported the
地区
growth
的
of
规
the
模以上
Chinese
工业增加
economy.
值同比分别增
In
长了
particular, the
5.9% 和
growth of
6%，
industrial output.
均快于全国的增速。
And the mid
那
and
么从
western important part increased by 5.9%, increased by 6% faster than the 5.9% average nationwide.
6月份41个工业大类行业中，27个行业增速以上有回升，占65.9%。
Of 41 categories, 27,
21个地区规模
that is
以上工业增速回升，
65.9%,
占
maintained growth.
67.7%。装备制造业加快
And
明
of the
显，
31
随着
megacities,
产业链供应
21,
链逐步打通，
that is
汽车生产大幅
67.7%
回升，
maintained growth.
推动装备制造业的加快。
And equipment
那么6月
manufacturing
份
was one
的
of the
装备制造
highlights.
业的增加值同比增长了 9.2%，
The
那么比
equipment
上月是加快了
manufacturing in
8.1
June
个百分点，其中汽
increased
车
by
制造业
9.2%,
增长
faster than the
16.2%， 上月是下
8.1%,
降7%。
and automobile
3是前期受疫情冲击
16.2%,
较大地区的工业
down
生
by
产
7%
明显恢复。
month
6月
to
份
month.
上海、吉林规模以上工业增加值
In
同比
June,
分别增长了 13.9%
in Shanghai and
和
Jilin, the
6.3%， 上个月分别是下降
value added of
30.9%
industrial
和
output
4.9%。
increased
那么这些情况表明，工业
by
生产稳步恢
13.9%
复，
and
疫情等外部冲击影响
6.3%
逐
respectively.
步消退，生产运转加快改善，对经济
As
支撑
COVID
作用在
situation
增强。
eases, we
产业
see
升
a
级发展
growing
态势持续，有利
amount
于
of supporting
工
role
业
played by
发展的
the
质量提高。
industrial
但也要看
output.
到，目前工业产销衔接不畅
But still,
问题
there
仍
are
然存在
still，
部分行业企业困难较
blocks
多，稳定工业经济
hindering
仍需
the
要持续的努
transition
力。
from supply
下阶
and
段要
sale.
落实好各项
We still need
助企
continued
纾困的
efforts
政策，
to
强
help
化物流保通保畅，
companies out of the
打通产业
difficulties,
链供应链堵点，支
ensure
持企
the
业创
availability
新
of
发展，
supply chains, and
推动
supply
工
the
业生产
innovation
平稳运
development,
行。谢谢。
innovation-driven development of companies and industries.
那我们最后一个问题吧。
Thank you. Last question.
谢谢主持人。每日经济新闻记者提问。
Daily
4
economic
月份
news.
我国社零总额同比增速达
In
到今年
April,
上半
the
年以来的低点，此后5月、
growth
6月
of
出现反弹
retail
趋
sales
势。
of consumer
那么这
goods
是否意味
hit
着
the
今
low
年消
point
费
in
V 字
H1.
形的拐点
Then we
已经
see
过去？
a rebound
消费的
in
迅速反弹
May
是
and
否与
June.
多地启动消费
Does
券
this mean that
短期
we have
刺激有
passed
关？
the
国家
V-shaped
统计局
turning
如何
point
预
of
判下
consumption
半年
this year?
的消费趋势？
How do you
谢谢。
predict consumption in the next
大家
half
对消
of
费
the
问
year?
题也是比较关注。
Thank you for your
今年以
question.
来呢，这个多方
I
面因
know
素影
that
响
we are
这个
watching
消费的
consumption
增长
very
呢确实受到
closely
了一定的
due
影
to
响。
multiple factors.
那
Consumption
么
has been
上半年呢受
affected
到这个
in the
疫
first
情
half
多发
of the
散
year
发的这个
due
冲击
to
影响，
sporadic
市场销售呢
COVID
是出现
cases,
下滑，特别是服务消费呢回落是比较明
market
显。
consumption
那么上半年呢，社会消
dropped
费品流动总额呢是同比下降了
significantly.
0.7%。
Total retail
但是
sales
5月份以来呢，
was
随着
down
疫情反弹得到控制呢，促消费政策
0.7%,
显
but
效呢，
since
市场销
May,
售呢是稳步回升。
as
那么5月份的
the
社零
COVID
总额
situation
呢，同比
eases
下降了
and our
5月份是同
policies
比
have
下降
taken
了
effect.
6.7%，降幅是收窄了4.4个百分点。那么6月份呢，
In
增
May,
速转正，
the
同比增长
decline
了
of
3.1%。
total retail sales
那么从
was
上半年
curbed
情况来看呢，
and
市场
it
销售呢
turned
主要是以
positive
下几
in
个特
June.
点。一
There
呢
are
是这个
the
基本
following
生活消费较快
features in
增长。
total retail sales.
上半
Number
年呢，
one,
粮油食品类、饮料类的零售额呢，
food
同比分别
beverage
增长了9.9%和
consumption
8.2%。
increased by
居民的基本生活
9.9%
消
and
费呢，应该说是
8.2%
整体上得到了保
respectively,
障。
which has supported
二
people's
是网
normal
上零
lives.
售稳
Number
定增
two,
长。
online
上半
sales
年实物
continued
商
to
品网
grow.
上零售
In
额
the
同
first
比增
half
长
of the year, online
5.6%，
sales
占社会消费
was
零
up
售总额的比重呢达到了
5.6%, accounting
25.9%。
for
三是服务消费是
55.9%
下
of the
降的。
total. Number
那么
three,
受疫情冲击
service
影响的服务
consumption
消费呢下
dropped
降明显。
due to
上
COVID.
半年呢
Service consumption
餐饮收入同比
decreased
下降是
significantly.
7.7%。
Catering industry
那么
was
居民旅
down
游出行等服务消
7.7%.
费呢也有所
Tourism
减少。
consumption
但是从6月
decreased
份的
as
情况来
well.
看呢，应该说
But
呢，
in
这个
June,
国内市场销售呢还是出现了积极的变
market
化。
sales
一是
in the
多数商
country
品
saw some
零
positive
售增
changes.
速呢是回
Number
升。
one,
那么
most
6月份
products
18类
saw a
限额以
rebound
上商
of
品零售额
consumption.
当中呢，
Among
近
the
90个
18
商品零售
types of
额
products,
类值增速
nearly
呢是比上月回
90%
升。
saw an
其中
increase
穿
over
类
the
和用
previous
类商品
month.
的类值
In
增速呢回
particular,
升明显。
food and
6月份
clothing
的这个化妆
saw a
品
big
类和通讯器材类
increase. Meanwhile,
商品零售额线上
ICT products
零售额呢分别增长了8.1%
and
和
cosmetics
6.6%。
saw an
二
increase
是
of
大宗商品
6.6% and
消费的带动
8.1%
明显。
respectively.
那
Number
么乘用
two,
车购置税减半等促进重点
due
领域消
to
费政策出台
the
落地，
policies such as
促进了汽车和家电
related
大
to
宗
car
商品消费
industry,
的这个改善。
the home
6月份
appliance
限额
and
以上
car consumption increased significantly. In June,
电器及音像器材类的商品零售额同比分别增长了13.9%和13.2%。
13.9% and 3.2% respectively, much higher than the previous month, and has contributed to the increase of total retail sales. Number 3, consumption of catering also increased. In June, catering industry dropped by about 4%, but that was 17 percentage points narrower than the previous month. Number 5, consumption in COVID hit areas increased. Consumption in COVID hit areas saw a sound picture. In particular, in Shanghai and Jilin, the situation is turning for the better. Generally speaking, consumption is showing a momentum of improvement with more positive changes. And meanwhile, we're still facing some pressure and challenges in recovering consumption. But China's trend for consumption upgrading still remains, and China's consumption is expected to maintain a stable performance. Thank you very much. This is the end of this press conference. Bye-bye.